Hi, Brandon.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Chris.
I'll put my camera on in a minute. I'm just still fussing with settings. Happy Monday, folks. Who's excited for Monday?
It's already over Monday, but
Oh yeah, you live in the future.
Is it really a happy Monday? Can we really say it's happy?
Yeah, I didn't really want to wake up this morning. I was irresponsible with programming last night, and I could have slept more. So Christian, did you and someone else still meet last week?
Yeah, we figured that we will be only like 3 people or 4, but then eventually I think we talked for 20 minutes or even 30 minutes, so it was a longer meeting than expected, I think.
Well, that's actually great. Do you want to share what you talked about? Is there anything of note?
I think what we talked about most was this point, yeah, the striked out ones, I think, or was it, no, was it up there? Yeah, the one, the image author, a discussion about how runtime might deal with the compatibility spec that is defined but not available or something like that. So that this as an image author, I want to ensure that runtimes without image compatibility deal with it. I think that was the main discussion, right? As far as I remember, Dirk, that's what we talked about the most.
Yeah, that one, and we just chatted about FOSDEM and some other small topics.
Did you have any different insights you wanted to share, or is that one good to kind of, we sort of put that one in the bucket of like, we will look at this later because we were getting stuck on it. I think we spent like almost an entire meeting talking about it.
No,
Yeah,
I think we
if I see
can.
that.
Oh, sorry, Dirk, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. I think I see a reworded version, right? So that's I have missed that before.
It was added late in the meeting last time by me.
Okay, yeah, I missed it. So I'm not sure if you want to open that conversation, then now would be good. Otherwise, we add it to the end, maybe.
Yeah, I think we can put this put a pin in this and discuss later. I think once we actually have the artifact that we talk about and have more experience in what it looks like, then it makes more sense to discuss it anyways, right?
Yeah, and I think for the new point, I know it's a new point, but I think we've talked about that before, how we don't want things to break for example, registries that don't support, for example, having an artifact at all, and to gracefully fall back to something that works. So I think for the new one that was added, number 7, is that it? I think we mostly can agree on that. Does anyone think that's not a valid point?
No, I think that's exactly that, right? So if you don't care, you use whatever works for you, like how it works today as well. Yeah, I'm looking
So,
forward to the
I mean,
discussion, I think.
in a way, this adds a requirement that you always have a fallback images, but there might not be one, right? So other than like the pause image or something like that. So
Yeah, or you don't have any, right? If it's an image image index without a usable image for you, without the architecture that you need, then you just don't. Like, you get the platform error, like, eventually.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I was doing a matrix of builds last night and I was getting that error. And anyway, okay, cool. There were a few other use cases that I added from someone in my group that I think are already represented. Can we scroll up? I think I put a comment there.
So up means Olga, this part.
Yeah. So Olga's from my group and she wanted to add some of her use cases. I think we've already talked about these because it's for hardware. Let's see. So Benchmark is basically something that under the hood is running a tool called Ramble, which is actually owned by Google now. That's basically going to be building different kind of applications that can measure something. And basically that second point is about microarchitecture. So that's ArchSpec. I don't think there's anything new there in terms of use cases. I think like the details of her use case are new, but I think those 2 points we've sort of hammered down on and we're definitely considering. Does anyone see something there I'm missing?
No. Right? I think.
Okay, cool. Should we go on to the place we stopped last time and charge forward bravely and hope we get through some?
Maybe before we do that, just a brief reminder that FOSDEM is in 2 weeks. So I'm going to prepare some slides. I have 10 minutes, so it's not a really long presentation. I will just like discuss the problem, what we did so far, and now with the working group, what our discussion was and what we maybe think this will end up in the future. So, and I maybe I can push the slides next week, and then we can have a short discussion about that and see if everyone feels well represented by my fumbling about containers and HPC. And
it won't be fumbling. Yeah, I was going to suggest to share the slides so we can go over them. And yeah, I would absolutely love to look at those slides. And that's going to be awesome.
And in addition, and I put it on the Slack channel as well, like the ISC in May is going to have like an HPC container workshop, again, the 10th edition. So we have a full day where we can also discuss things for all Europeans here or people who like to travel to Europe. Then we can maybe join forces during the workshop. It's like 5:16.
I'm guessing that one's not virtual.
Yeah, I think I took some liberty in the past, so hopefully I can do that this time around as well. Put you guys on a separate screen. That would be my goal, but
okay, I'd love to participate in that if I could. It would be virtual though. So
yeah, let's see. I won't promise it, but I hope to do it because the screen costs like $500.
you have to buy the screen and bring the screen.
No, you rent it for a day. It costs $500. So
oh my god, you should just
who...
buy one. Buy yourself a big screen TV for your houseboat. It'll be bigger than the boat.
That's true. Yeah, let's see. But yeah, more to come there. Okay, but yeah, now let's jump in.
Okay, so I think there was a yellow mark where we left off, if I remember. He marked it.
Yeah, I already deleted it. So we.
Oh, you deleted it? Wait, where was it? We need the mark.
Where I'm screen sharing. Am I not screen sharing?
Okay, as long as you know, then
I know. Trust me.
Okay. Can you highlight it? Oh yeah, reviewed here until 2022. Okay, so we're at deployment engineer.
Okay, cool. We are in the line.
Can we remind ourselves what a deployment engineer is?
Now I have to redo all my other changes.
Person that runs kubectl apply.
Person that runs kube. Yeah, I say kubectl to kube control.
It's kubectl. I've said.
Yeah, I say yeah. As a deployment engineer, I want to parse an image index, find the most compatible image for the cluster node and aim to run the image on.
So it's not the one who's built the image, but who has an artifact that he wants to apply, right? So yeah.
So that would sort of imply that the logic is embedded in the tools that the deployment engineer is using. Because if it's not, that means that they're going to have to do some extra special parsing to get the compatibility artifact, wherever that is, put it together with the image. Is that correct? And also parse an image index, that's also vague in the sense that like, well, you can parse the image index, but you may have to like get something and then look something else up. Or maybe you have to do that many times.
But this is what Brendan doesn't want us to do, right? It should be somehow in the image index, should be everything that you need. I mean, that would be a question, like, I think with it, that's up for discussion at the end of the, when we come back to this, how do we put this in the image index, right? Because we cannot put everything that's in the compatibility definition into the image index. It needs to be maybe, I don't know, a tag or something that describes a certain system or a certain configuration, which is not very elaborate, but elaborate enough to describe something, like maybe a HPC system node, like HPE ProLiant, whatever. I don't know, something like that.
I would take this point and just delete parse an image index and say, as a deployment engineer, I want to find the most compatible image. Because I don't know why the use case has to have parse an image index. If we find a way for that deployment engineer to get the most compatible image, it doesn't require an image index, would that not meet the use case?
Sounds
Okay,
good
then
to
let's
me. I'm
remove
not
it.
sure if I used those words before or not. I'm looking for, see where they came from.
I don't understand those choices at all. I saw Google.
I was trying to find a way to strike through something.
Oh, that's probably in text formatting options. So go to like format, text.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I found it. It's from Christian.
It's
Okay,
for me.
I'm good with that first. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm fine with it as well.
So this second point feels like an extension of the first. Again, doesn't necessarily have to be an image index. So as a deployment, the first one, as a deployment engineer, I want to find the most compatible image where the compatible image fits the selected host and finds the best performing match. Can we combine these two to
But
be?
I would say that the 2B, is it even possible? I mean, if you have application A, maybe you could say like it appears to be the best performing one because it has like the most matching features with the CPU, but you do not know if it's the best performing one, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
too
that's a
much to
whole
ask.
body
It's
of work
best
that has
performing
to be
match,
done.
right? So
Yeah,
it's
what does that
the
mean? That word performance, it's a very dangerous word to use in these discussions.
I think we should say best scored or something like that. Highest scored.
Yeah, that would.
Or just best match.
Closest.
Yeah,
exactly.
or just best match and let the subjectivity reign.
I feel like we're putting a lot of words around wanting to take a given image and either as a runtime pick an entry from the image index we want to run, or as a node scheduler, schedule it on the most appropriate node in the cluster.
Yeah, that's why I would simplify these two bullets just into one. This means A and B. I think it's okay to have the detail, but I don't think it needs to be 2 points. It's saying the same thing.
Yeah, and finding the best match between nodes and image available, I think that's, as you said, Brent, it's for the scheduler to decide, right? I think the feature is I need to find, for a given node, I need to find the best compatible image. And then I can do this for all the nodes, and then I will find the best combination, right? I would delete 2 or 1B. Or maybe we can keep it there. I don't know. Maybe it's okay. Because it's just describing a feature that's higher up the stack, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I am excited about the idea that people will be able to take our compatibility attributes, or whatever they're called, and start to think about actual algorithms for determining what is a match. And maybe someone will bring in something with performance, but that's outside of scope of what we're doing. But the use case is kind of cool to think about. That'll sort of naturally emerge in this landscape. Okay, let's move on to the new point 2. As a deployment engineer, I want to inspect an image and check whether the image is going to run in the system I'm on, so I don't download a large image just to have it seg faults. That's never happened to any of us, right? Never.
Yeah, I think that's valid, right? I mean, it's just a smoke test. Is it going to run anyways beyond the architecture, the very cross-grained architecture? So I think that's a valid one.
Yeah, I think it's sort of covered by one with the like wording most compatible. If you
But
just
it doesn't
fix the
it doesn't exclude things, right?
Yeah, for me, the second one is basically the distinction is that it's an explicit check. It's a manual check. I want to be able to take an image, choose to inspect it, and maybe look at more detail than an automated tool would look at. So one is like, I want my tools to work in an automated way, select the best one. Number 2 is like, I, the human, want to take my eyes and inspect this and look at it more in detail. I don't know if that's just my read though.
I would see that as a pre-hook before deploying and say like, okay, let's first do the smoke test. We picked an image, but will it actually really run? I mean, it should be catched by the selection of the image, but maybe there is something special that prevents it from running and it was not catched in the selection. So that's just to me, it's just a smoke test. Like, is it going to run? If not, then just fail.
So the goal is to reduce the download of large images that don't work.
How would you smoke test it without downloading it? What do you mean when you say a smoke test?
Yeah, if the compatibility matrix or attributes or whatever we call it says like, I have this special ID or of CPU feature that needs to be enabled, and it turns out that the runtime or the actual host does not have it enabled, and not sure if the selection of the image goes into every little nitty-gritty detail. This would go into the nitty-gritty detail, as you said, like an explicit check. I have this this manifest and not an image index. I have this manifest, this already selected image, and I want to check if that's going to run.
Gotcha.
But why don't we use that all the time?
Because it might
this
be
bullet
too
point was
much
being-
detail.
When the bullet point was being added, I think what we were looking at was saying you don't want to download the image layers to check the image compatibility. I think that's what we were getting at. And I think that's pretty reasonable. I think pretty much all the compatibility options we've been looking at so far don't require you to download the layers to be able to check it.
And if, I mean, not sure, but if the selection or this check, whether it will actually run is going to be a little bit compute intensive, which it might not be, but if I mean, if the selection of the image from an index is going to be exhaustive and checks every little detail and maybe takes into account maybe that's too much, but takes into account, I'm just saying it and then regret it, but takes into account the conditions that we use to run it, maybe input or something, that there is maybe more checks that you can do than select an image based on the compatibility metrics or the compatibility attributes. Is it something that is already sufficient, or do we need an explicit check for one image against?
The way I see it is that a tool is going to have a default number of things that it checks. There's going to be a huge space, potentially a huge space of metadata, and we probably aren't going to check them all by default. And so the second bullet is saying like, okay, I know my systems really well, so I want to maybe select other things that aren't in that default check just to double check, because I think if we check every single thing for bullet 1, we'd probably get something that looks like overfitting. Like probably most of the things that are in this bag of attributes are overkill, but there's probably also something in there that someone in bullet 2 would really care about. So I see bullet 2 as being like probably running almost a similar or the same command, but saying like, yeah, add in this metadata field too, because I know this about my system and I care about it.
And maybe it also cares about like the attributes or input data that is put into this image. Like it's more specific to a given workload or a given application and say like, okay, I have this kind of input and can you please be very specific and check that? But that's maybe too much. And sorry.
Yeah, I don't know
Are
the
we-
details of this, but there's cool ways you can like you can like not preload, because I don't know how much you have to download, but there's ways that you can like have an execution pathway of an image trace and then be able to just know exactly where one particular thing is that you want to look at. So you maybe have to download something, maybe not the entire image, but I can kind of see what you're getting at. And you wouldn't want that in an initial compatibility check, but you might want that in a more detailed checking mode.
Are we digging too much into the seg fault condition here and not just that it's outside the layers, image layers? Is that what's happening? I'm trying to understand the contention on this one because it feels like something that none of us have even proposed anything that would break this requirement.
Oh yeah, I
Unless
don't think
we're-
there's contention. I think we're just like overly discussing it because that's what we tend to do on like a lot of things.
Yeah, I would keep it super simple and just say that all of the image compatibility spec details, wherever they happen to be, do not require downloading the image layers. And I think that gets at the original request pretty good, and that avoids us going back and forth on details too much.
Yeah, I would be okay to change it to that.
Yeah, I'm fine with it too. Even though I think it's more, we are asking for a deeper check in this, but maybe I'm misreading.
I would
it.
just say the image compatibility check does not require the additional download of layers. I think do we have to say as a deployment engineer and like everyone, like aren't we already in the space of the deployment engineer? We know we are the deployment engineer. We have embodied the deployment engineer.
This is like those.
In case it's
places once you
copied
start, you can't
around,
stop.
then you have the whole sentence.
That's true. That's true. Okay, that's fair.
X down. So is this what we wanted to say? I'm sorry, this one.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then we can delete too. Isn't this like number 3 the same thing? What?
It's
Can we
that one
delete this?
might be from me, and yeah, that is the same as one.
Delete, destroy it, kill it with fire. I'm just getting rid.
We will have duplicates. We just copied everything from everybody. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Those are the best kind though, because they're like really easy to just like plow through. What does append the compatibility mean?
I think associate the compatibility definition with an manifest. That's what I would read into it. Like having the subject thing going on, which maybe, or referencing it from the manifest itself. I think that's what.
I read into this. The image author said this is going to run on AMD 64V3 with this GPU in it, and you get a new GPU that the image author didn't know about. You can now update and say it runs on this new GPU as well.
Yeah, so associated with a second definition.
Yeah, but what if they're
So-
wrong?
So we had somewhere a extend
But
use
that's
case
them doing it
already.
on their own registry. So if they're wrong, they're doing it to their own image.
So can we remove this sentence about especially for images released before? Because I don't think it adds value.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense because you want to add the compatibility link, but before, oh, they're saying like posts. Yeah, I understand. Oh,
Post the creation of an image, you know, even after the working group has done our thing, if somebody creates an image and doesn't add compatibility details to it, someone wants to be able to add those after the fact.
Yeah, so if the image author didn't do it, then the deployment engineer wants to be able to add it. But that's the first part of the sentence already.
I mean, so this totally depends on what we design and how we design it, but given there's a tool to do that, and given the person has ownership of some registry where they can push the final things, I don't see why that's impossible.
So my
So
question was
this-
whether this extra sentence adds any value. For me, it doesn't.
I would just delete it. I think the case of before the working group existed and, you know, an image that just didn't have it, that's sort of like the same thing. You have an image that doesn't have it, that predates whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Patrick?
Yeah, wasn't there such a use case already somewhere over there that you
Yeah,
could
I
add
think we had one. Yeah, I remember that as well, but I wasn't.
add
I
the
didn't want
spec
to
to an
scroll
image
around
that
rapidly.
was just being used.
Maybe it's this one. I want to update compatibility independently without having to re-release and redistribute my image. Maybe that one. Anyhow.
Yeah, so this is like a similar case, but it's a deployment engineer that wants to do it.
Yeah, I
as
think
opposed
it's
to the
fair
image
to
author.
repeat it. So I just.
But if the deployment engineer just applies an artifact, I mean, this would create an artifact, right? So isn't it misplaced in a sense that it's the image author or the manifest author, if you will, like the image index author somehow?
This is where the
This-
deployment engineer becomes the image author.
That this is where the
He
image
has a
author didn't
life-changing
do
role.
it. That this is where the image author didn't do it, and the deployment engineer is saying, well, they didn't do it, I want to do it.
Yeah, but then he is the image author in this sense, right? I mean, it's just
No,
my
he's not
mom
the
can
image
also
author.
not do this, but she can become an image author. And we don't have my mom as a top level. Anyhow, so
Surprise
I'm
Well, we
promotion.
should have your mom as top level, but that's another topic.
We just need a use case section for Christian's mom.
Yeah.
No, I think so. The way I read it is that the image integrity, so the blobs, the layers are not affected by the image compatibility spec. So they are provided by the image author, and the compatibility spec is entirely orthogonal to that. That's how I read it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that the devil's in the details in terms of how it's implemented, because probably there's going to be some digest change somewhere that you have to update. So then the image URI, the base URI might stay the same, but the digest is going to change. But yeah, I think this is a fine use case. I think it's going to be I think it's going to come down to some tool that's able to take whatever we design for the compatibility spec, whether that be within an existing manifest or an additional artifact, and then make sure that the changes are done and make sure that all of the correct digests are changed. And then, you know, YOLO deployment engineer can push it back up to their registry and do whatever they want with it. I mean, theoretically speaking, there's nothing from preventing anyone from taking any kind of annotations or, you know, an existing compatibility spec and pairing it with an existing image, even if it's totally wrong. Like if you have write permission to a registry, like you are grandmaster, so it doesn't matter. I'm good to say this point's fine and move on to the next one.
Yeah. No, I'm also, but yeah, 4 I'm not
I
sure
have
about.
concerns.
Yeah.
Is anyone here willing to raise your hand and say this was your bullet point?
I have a comment, so I'm afraid it might be mine. Of course, I'm not sure I remember. Okay. Expecting an isolated self-extant container. I want to know metadata size. Ah, I see. So this is the case that we kind of talked about early, but I don't think would be well covered here. This is like looking at metadata down to a layer. So like, for example, I build a lot of containers that have SPAC views in them, where I don't care about anything else in the container, but I just take the SPAC view and I move it somewhere else. And I think now that we've talked about a lot more things, I would say that if that container is intended to be a SPAC view, I would have the outer metadata just representing that SPAC view. And I don't think there's like a special need for describing a single layer.
Was that a long way of saying we can delete this?
Yes, that was a long one to delete it, kill it with fire.
Thanks for asking for confirmation, because I had the same thought in mind. Added for
Oh God, I
comedy.
think this is mine too.
Yeah, I think that's your.
I mean, that's what it does, right? So I think have we talked about MPI and versions in another place? Has that use case come up yet?
I don't think we have talked specifically about MPI beforehand.
This is interesting because it's sort of a software thing, but it also is like one of the most important things in HPC. And it really will just like throw up on you in so many different ways if you get it wrong. So we could, I think it's okay to leave MPI, but we could also generalize to like when there's a particular library that is just so essential for your container to work, can our compatibility spec address that use case?
Where would this library be? Wouldn't it be in the container?
Yes.
But do you target like the user mode and kernel mode component of such libraries, like similar to the GPU drivers or something? Can we generalize it like that? Because that's what's going to bite you, right? It's not the MPI library within the container, but the interaction of this library with the outside world.
No, I think generally you'd want to know, like, this is Open MPI 4.1.2, and like you'd want to know the exact details before you kind of pull it. Even just like the implementation of MPI, because they have huge variance in how they perform on different clouds. So I don't know that we necessarily even need to know something about the kernel I think it would be much hard. I think it's much easier just to kind of have an annotation that says the flavor and the version, as opposed to trying to represent it some other way. That's what a deployment engineer is going to look for, I think.
But where does this bite, like outside of the container? Does it need a kernel version or a hardware version, or?
Oh, you have a kernel. The driver has a kernel component that needs to be loaded, a kernel module, and it needs to have a userland module within the container, like similar to what you have in a GPU driver as well.
Ah, okay.
But I think this will be the most compatible image piece should cover this as well, right? You define like your host installation has ABI compatibility with libfabric or MPI MPitch.
Okay, you mean that you actually mount something into the container?
Could mount it various ways,
Yeah.
So it depends on the use case. In HPC, you're going to mount it. If you're pulling something down with MPI to like a pod, you're not going to mount it. You're just going to be using the container in the pod. But it can still throw up on you.
Yeah. Okay. So this wants to catch both situations, that you actually have the container, it contains MPI. You want to be sure that that will work, and then you have something that wants to use MPI is not part of the container. You have to mount it from outside, and you want it to work. No?
Yeah, I think it's a rat hole we can dive into for half an hour, but maybe we could just, I totally agree that this should be catched, so I think we can just keep it there, right?
Yeah.
Is this rewording sufficient, or do we want to be going in more details about the kernel module and kernel host?
I don't think we need to go into more details. I do think it might be worth, I think this generic idea that there's something in my container that I really need to know metadata about, the version, some kind of library that has implications for when I actually run it. And I think that it should be, all of this comes down to a label checking task, right? There's going to be some annotation that says, okay, this is the MPI variant, this is the version, and is this the one that I want? And so this might be that second case where you're checking for a more detailed compatibility given that. And I think as a group, we just have to empower different communities to be able to make those labels that they need for their checks and then use them, even if they don't turn out to be like in the default set, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, so what we're getting at here is that the image compatibility can't just be hardware and kernel. It needs to be able to be extended for application or user specific values.
Exactly. So I'm good moving on to the next one if others are.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether I should capture Brandon's comment, which for me was very helpful. Something like that.
Or libraries, I mean.
Or other embedded applications / libraries. Yeah, I think we want to be careful not to be kind of agnostic, not agnostic, but like not to place heavy limitations on what people are allowed to say is something they care about for compatibility. Like if someone says, this is really important to me, and we'll be like, oh, no, it's not kernel and it's not this, so therefore it's not. And they're like, but it is. Like, I think we should not do that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is where do you end, right? So I think one of the use cases could be like, I want to have the licenses of all the software bill of materials inside a container, because I don't want to run code that is licensed, I don't know, with the what the fuck license or something like that. And then it becomes interesting. But yeah, I'm derailing.
Well, if it's just an extra annotation and someone wants to add it to their build and then someone wants to like later query for it, there's no reason why you couldn't do that. You know, eBPF has like license like built into it. It's really cool. I've never seen anything like that before, so I thought that was cool.
Well, it runs in kernel space, it has to.
And I think MPI is going to be the litmus test for this, like how crazy it goes. But yeah, let's see. But I think we can keep it like that and move on, right?
Yeah, so this next point is basically saying like, I would like to be able to use this compatibility annotation space for metadata about documentation kinds of things.
I like that. In my presentations from back then, I have annotations with the Docker file, like intended to have the Docker file in it, and intended maybe to have a link to a documentation where you can like do a little hello world test. Not sure if it's necessarily a compatibility thing. It's maybe more an annotation that is just like, okay,
Yeah, I was
here's.
about to ask that because I feel like we have that today with the annotations without having to extend the compatibility spec for that.
I guess though what the compatibility spec is kind of adding is it's going to create these communities or namespaces or prefixes or whatever you want to call it. And we haven't really had the opportunity to formally do that with annotations. Like people could, but no one has stepped forward to do that. So for example, we can now, if we're going to, for example, for the supercontainers.org, define a set of annotations that we compare about for MPI, we might have a family for MPI, and we might also throw in a standard family for those links that are important. And it's not to say that it's explicitly for compatibility, but this is the opportunity, the time that we can do it. So I guess I agree it is not part of compatibility, but it is part of metadata and information that could help someone to learn about an image that may trickle down into their understanding of its compatibility. So I guess my question is, what would be the reason to prevent someone from doing this?
So I'm a bit confused. So annotations are labels, right? Or is that something else? Yeah.
They are
okay.
similar.
Similar, yeah.
Okay. I need to learn the details for that, but maybe not here. Does this statement mean that the compatibility spec by itself can have annotations?
Ooh, but I mean, I guess so, right, Brendan? If it's like an artifact, it can have annotations.
If it's an artifact, yes. With the getting the phrasing on this one, but with the cautionary tale of do not overuse annotations on an artifact because they are pulled up, and registries may reject your artifact if you put too many annotations on there, that it might start blowing out size limits.
I think I agree with what you said, Vanessa, but I think if we maybe want to put it somewhere else and not in this compatibility definition, and just say, okay, we introduce compatibility definitions now, and we want to make sure that we can use it, so we need to put a documentation somewhere as well. And if it's in the definition, maybe we can put it somewhere else. And while we introduce this to the community, we can say like, okay, do this as well, and not put everything there. But maybe that's a gut feeling. Sorry, Brendan.
No, that's a good point. An interesting use case I had in mind is like, let's say that you're using a tool that's doing a compatibility check and something goes wrong. If there's an annotation that reliably has like the GitHub, then the tool could know to look for it, be like, okay, you can ask for help here. And then all of a sudden the person has saved that step of having to like find the project out in the wild. But I agree with you, maybe this part of our working group can be figuring out where, can be defining this set of sort of helper links and figuring out the best place to put them, which may not be actually alongside the compatibility spec, but somewhere else.
I feel like all the descriptions you've got right now fit so tightly into what's already there in the image annotations today that I would say check those and see if there just might be some shortcomings with that list that we want to extend that list.
Yeah, so I'm going to +1 what Christian said. I think we should look at what already exists and then try to promote it. Because if it's not being used, then it needs promotion, right? Because it seems important. But people are historically very bad at metadata stuff, so.
So as my day job, I would say we are respecting annotations, but they are definitely not exhaustive enough, or they don't cover everything that you want to declare. But so I think we will agree to not treat this as a valid use case, so I crossed it out. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Do we want to add one that says the compatibility spec wants to have annotations as well? Annotations could have everything if you wanted them to. Yeah.
It's a key value store. You can put any key in any value.
Yeah, of course. But the thing is, then you have people arguing with you that it's not specified in the OCI specification, so you shouldn't set on it. But I
think in addition to what we said, I mean, what is the thing that we want to put there? Like, if it's a spec installed application, do we want the spec project, the spec package? Do we want like the hello world from the author of the application, or the image author that says, okay, this is how you use my image? I think there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of confusion that we cannot really define what the documentation links are. I think that's something that we should push alongside this and try to form best practices in the community that we are in, as hard as it's going to be. But I think that's fine. And maybe that's something that we can discuss at the ISC workshop. Like, how do we do documentation in the same way without overloading?
Yeah, we suck at documentation. We suck. Let's get better. How do we get better? It's an afterthought, so it absolutely has to be something that's automated at the end of the day. Anyway, not to distract. So this one's really cool, but it's outside of what we're working on. I would love to see someone that can take images and run benchmarks and store the mean and standard deviation somewhere for someone else to use. But this is not something that I think a compatibility spec is going to give you, because that mean and standard deviation is absolutely going to vary based on so many different variables. It would be kind of dumb actually to put it in, you know, alongside an image as some kind of actual representative value.
Yeah, it's almost like if Reframe or some benchmarking framework takes the hash and the hash of the host definition and then like creates a big database of what you can expect. But yeah, no, we train an LLM model and then off we go and it just spits out what's expected. No, I think it's too much.
Not
Yeah,
to
I would
mention we
cross
have a
this
lot
one
of
out too.
servers out there, and the server itself is the mean standard time is supposed to be infinite. Not supposed to stop.
So I can see some abstract value. So when we say I would like to be able to say this image is like 20% faster than the other image, so that you can do trade-off of like, do I spin up a separate node for running the slightly faster image rather than the more compatible image. And so I think that has some value, right? So if you can give relative scores of like, well, this image gonna improve you by 2%, so you say, okay, I'm gonna ignore it, so I'm just using the general image.
I think that's up for higher stacks to define this. I mean, if we have the most compatible image, it should be kind of the most performant image if you look for like the best matching CPU or whatever. But I think it's hard to define this very.
Okay, so for me, compatible is the least matching, basically. So the one that runs with anything, basically. But anyway.
Oh, the
Yeah,
most
I
specific,
think this belongs in like a layer below. So you could see getting those compatibility attributes and then having a tool that builds models that says, okay, based on these attributes, this is the, you know, predicted performance. Let me put that in a database somewhere so other people can use it in the future. But it's not embedded within the compatibility tool. It's like it's using the compatibility tool for a full use case, but it's not something that we should be thinking about.
But the most compatible image is the best matching one, right? The most specific match, I would assume, at least in my mind. Like if I have an x86 V1 or V2 or V3 image, I take the V3 image because it's the most optimized for the actual architecture I'm on.
Yeah, it's the least compatible one. So the V1 one is the most compatible one because it runs on anything, including V1.
Oh,
No,
yeah,
it's
I
the
want it
most
the other way around.
generic one. It's not the most compatible one for the particular machine.
The most specific one that is, I think,
Yeah, so the most specific one I agree with. So anyway, just we are discussing birds that we don't have to.
yeah, and it's maybe configurable if it's anyhow. Yeah, no, let's not go into that maybe too much.
So this one is about some kind of.
This is basically akin to number 5, the crossed out number 5, I think. So I would be okay to cross this one out too. I'm pretty sure this is mine. I'm pretty sure I'm the one who'd write provenance stickler.
Okay, so it's
Well,
about additional annotations.
yeah, well, I mean, it's a very good idea to know what software you are using at the end of the day when you have to actually produce some materials for it. Whether I'm not sure if it actually belongs into this specification as such.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting if you are actually doing software bill of materials tracking, then that actually needs to be aware of the compatibility spec because the software bill of materials might actually be very different depending on which compatibility spec image was chosen. So I see that there's some connection there, right?
Yeah, but this would be the guy who created the image. I think we had him earlier here. I think that's his domain.
There has been a request to make the tag listing or manifest query or whatever able to get more in depth in query and say, tell me all of the different images that have this annotation set on it. Because they want to be able to query for maybe a common version number across a lot of things or some other common metadata. I feel like this is getting into that where you're saying you want to generate a report and you want a catalog containers annotated with a certain thing. Is that the case, Vanessa, or are you thinking a completely different path?
Yeah, in my
If-
mind. Oh, go ahead.
So if you're asking me, then so I'm thinking that you could have like two images, like the previous V1 and V3 example, or different MPI versions. And one MPI version maybe has a specific project inside or a specific class inside that you're not actually interested in using. So you want to be able to have your problem and say, oh, I'm sure I didn't use that image. I'm only used the image that by policy I'm allowed to use.
So knowing that you use an image is a different and very difficult question. You would have to have access to the runtime and know which ones are being used. If we're talking about the registry side, querying which images say that they have MPI version 1.2.3, that would be an interesting query to be able to run. And we've heard that request before, but I think it gets beyond just what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think it's beyond as well. I also think
Yeah.
there's a directionality thing here. So if there's a published paper that says like we have solved cancer and all these things, that is going to have references to software and to containers that will point to the containers, the digest. And it's not that you want to go the other way and start with a container and get the DOI. I mean, there could be a tool that does that, right? But I think it's out of scope for us to define like, oh yes, this is where you put your DOI because it's such a niche specific thing.
Okay, I read it sort of, it was the software bill of materials that people were looking after.
Yeah, that's how I read it as well. Right? So I
Okay,
think,
but I think that goes to the whomever compiles puts the image together in the first place.
Yeah, who's managing SBOM stuff?
Yeah,
like
because the
Image offer.
deployment engineer is a little bit late in the food chain now because he sees basically a container containing some binary stuff. So whatever it's supposed to be using is not visible to that person anymore. Maybe this actually could be rephrased a bit and stuffed under
well, I
the-
mean, that's the point. I mean, the image offers provides SBOMs for multiple variants of variants of images. The compatibility spec chooses one of them. So you want to be able to choose the right SBOMs, right? That match to the image that was actually chosen by the compatibility spec. Which is in a way similar to point one, right? So as a deployment engineer, I want to be able to find out which is the image that I actually chose. And because then you can also determine which SBOMs is actually one that you should be looking at.
Isn't it the reporting feature that is done in another layer and not at the selection and runtime piece? It's just like a...
Yeah, it's not a runtime thing. I agree. But a deployment engineer might have this task. I don't know.
Or a deployment engineer having checked DOIs of software.
Yeah, SBOMs. I think that's important for deployment engineers. Could be. I mean.
Yeah, I think it's more important for like security as opposed to like my use case, which is not a very good use case. Brandon was making fun of me for the fact that we still publish papers.
I mean, we can move it to a security administrator and discuss it again over there. I think
Not making fun of you at all, Vanessa. You're just probably the unique one here that's doing it in general. That's a good thing.
Yeah, it's. I will withhold my opinions about publication. I have many, but they're strong. Yeah, I like moving it down to security because really that's what the SBOMs are about. You can check software too, but you really want to know about the CVEs.
Okay, it's good that I have some wine with me for the next one. I think I like that one as well, very much. So, off to 7.
7's now empty.
It's no longer 7.
Yeah, it's 8 is 7 now, right?
Not yet. 1 second. Now it's a 7. But we always had issues for 5. But since we didn't delete those, it's actually
Nobody likes 5. So wait, Christian, can you elaborate on why you have wine? for the
No,
numbers that-
I didn't put it in. I think I didn't put it in, but I like the notion of like if you have multiple runtimes on the node, are we also targeting our definition to maybe have some stuff in there that says, okay, with Podman it works this way, or with like, does it also take into account which runtime to use? I don't think so, but I think it's an interesting thought.
Oh God, do people actually have like multiple runtimes? Is that a thing? I mean, that sounds
I don't know.
really messy.
Brendan.
Yep.
It works
WASI
fine.
the WASI WASM group would be able to run WASI images on the same machine that runs ARM64 images.
But arguably you'd be looking for through a different set of things for that. Or no?
The stuff they're looking at right now from that group is, can we put this into a common manifest list? And so you have this overall manifest list that contains some images that can be run with one runtime and some images that can be run with a different runtime.
So we would,
For maybe as a made up use case for HPC, but I could imagine that for, like, say, accelerated use cases, you might pick some cool runtime like NVIDIA Podman or whatever over Docker, or a runtime that does not support or perform as good with certain accelerators than others. And then you say, like, okay, if you find this runtime, take this one. If you find this one, then have a fallback. I don't know. I mean, I think there's
so what's
some
the
merit to
tool
it.
doing that though? Because that's like, you're deleting runtime here, but like what this originally was saying is like, I want my runtime to find another runtime to
Yeah,
actually run
that
this
didn't make
instead.
any sense to me. That's why I was
No, but I
rewording
think the image index, like if it says I have this compatibility definitions for different images, it might be that an image is best run with a certain runtime. So at the selection process, you need to take into account which runtimes you have at your disposal, right?
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
fair. And this is almost, so Brandon put a comment, this is almost that similar thing, like we should allow for having kind of random annotations that let you make decisions like that. But I don't think it would be the case where Podman's like, oh, this should be, let me go call my Singularity friend. Like, it's more going to be like, oh, I'm not Singularity, so I'm going to skip this one.
I think it's going to be less that people have the Podman, Containerd, Singularity all on the same machine, and more they're going to have Containerd, NVIDIA, WASM. And the NVIDIA and WASM are not, well, Run C, NVIDIA, WASM, because Run C is not going to do the GPU stuff that the NVIDIA runtime does, and it's not going to do the stuff that the WASM runtime does. And right now, the way the Kubernetes group is doing this is they're throwing in some extra annotations and stuff like that on their deployment to say, pick this runtime on the machine when you run it, to explicitly hard code it on their deployment. It would be a lot nicer if the image index itself said, hey, when you run this, pick that thing.
Okay, I guess that the use case is fair then. The way it was originally worded was kind of wonky though.
Nice.
Okay, so then there needs to be actually some indication of a runtime, that is also a variable in the whole thing, in addition to kernel and, I don't know, hardware.
There could be, I don't see why not, if it's important for a specific thing. Again, I don't think we should constrain people to telling them what we allow for something that is important to assess for compatibility.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the WASI thing that is exactly probably at the moment something that you want to really select for. Last time I looked, it was still a little bit brewing, so I can understand that point definitely. Yeah.
All right, we're at the top of the hour. Do we want to put another marker here? We got down to number 5. Good job, everyone. Number 5. But we actually delete a lot, so it's not representing our true amount of work.
But number 5 survived this time. That's a new one.
Fine.
Well, for the time being, don't feel too safe, number 5. We may change our minds.
I want to leave folks with a parting thought, which is, are there specs out there today outside of OCI and anything we're talking about that define like the infrastructure as code definition for provisioning nodes. Like people today would use a Terraform or
Open tofu.
any, yeah, OpenTofu, any of these infrastructure as code tools right now, and they've got their own language. Is there any kind of generic spec out there that says provision a node that's got X, Y, and Z that you could then potentially import into a bunch of these tools?
There was an effort to make like a cloud language, but I don't, that seems like a really hard problem, and I don't know if they were successful.
I feel like we're trying to solve that problem, so I'm hoping that maybe someone else has already solved it for us and we don't have to do it.
I feel like someone may have tried to solve it and then realized how hard it is and then like largely give it up, but we'll wait to be seen, right?
All right. Have a nice
Alrighty,
Monday,
thanks everyone. Looking forward
Bye-bye.
to seeing your slides, Christian.
Yeah, me too.
When yeah. Alrighty, I'll see everyone next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. all.
Yeah.